My best friend turned my wedding into her engagement party with her boyfriend, and my fiancé supported her. In one moment I was left at the altar. My name is Rebecca Sims, and I want to recount the entire story of how my supposedly closest friend hijacked my own wedding day so she could announce her engagement to someone else while my fiancé stood by and let it happen. I will share every memory and emotion in my own words, writing in first person without parentheses or complicated formatting. This account will be extremely long, as I believe only a thorough chronicle can capture the depth of betrayal I felt. I will trace back to my childhood, how I first met my friend, how our bond developed, and how I eventually found myself standing at the altar alone when she turned the ceremony into her personal engagement party, with my fiancé inexplicably on her side. By the end, I hope you will see how a single day of heartbreak was rooted in years of hidden tension and illusions about friendship and love. I will speak as plainly as I can, letting the details unfold in the order I remember them. I was born in a cozy suburb outside Chicago. My parents, Leonard and Evelyn, were middle-class folks who worked diligently to give me a stable upbringing. I was their only child. From a young age, they taught me about loyalty, kindness, and the importance of choosing friends carefully. For many years, I thought I had chosen well. When I was 6, I met a girl in my neighborhood named Jessica. She was 2 years older than me, but we clicked immediately, bonding over our shared love of drawing in the dirt with sticks and chasing butterflies in the local park. Jessica was outgoing, a bit brash at times, but I admired her confidence and wanted to keep up with her. We became inseparable for the rest of my early childhood, always running around each other's houses, playing games, daydreaming about future adventures. My father joked that Jessica was the big sister I never had. My mother would give us snacks and watch us giggle in the backyard. As time passed, that friendship shaped me. Even though I was younger, Jessica let me feel like an equal partner in our escapades. When I was about 10, my parents decided to move to a different part of town for better schooling options. This meant I would see Jessica less often, but we vowed to remain friends. I recall the day we parted with tears in both our eyes. Over time, we adjusted to living a bit further apart, but we still visited on weekends or called each other on the phone. Jessica started middle school, then high school, while I followed behind her in grade level. Eventually, we both ended up at the same high school for a period, though she was 2 grades ahead. That was when I realized we were growing into different people. Jessica was popular, always in the center of attention, leading cheer squads or organizing parties, while I was more reserved, focusing on books and a smaller circle of friends. Still, we maintained the bond, often having long chats about our hopes, her crushes, my struggles, everything that came with teenage life. She graduated and went off to college out of state, but we stayed in touch. Occasionally, I would visit her campus, seeing how she thrived in that social environment. She had big dreams, talking about traveling the world, finding a life partner who matched her ambition. Meanwhile, I graduated high school, decided to attend a local college near home to stay close to family. Jessica encouraged me to break out, but I felt content where I was. Despite the geographical distance, we wrote long emails or messages, each updating the other about classes, heartbreaks, personal victories. Over time, it felt like we were more sisters than friends, even if we only saw each other a couple times a year. After she finished college, she returned to our hometown for a while, renting an apartment downtown. I was in my junior year of college. We started hanging out more regularly, and the closeness of our youth reignited. Jessica was now a confident, social young woman who easily made new friends. I introduced her to my college circle, and she introduced me to some people she met at local events. We had a few minor quarrels, as she sometimes overshadowed me in conversations, but I brushed it off. I told myself that was just Jessica's personality. Little did I know that the seeds of a bigger conflict lay hidden beneath her charm. Fast forward a few years. I graduated, found a job in marketing, and found my first serious boyfriend. He was a quiet type named Eric. We dated for about a year, but it did not work out. Jessica was there to console me, telling me I deserved better. Then I met Mark, a colleague from my office who was bright, funny, and shared my passion for writing. We dated for 2 years, and I thought he was the love of my life. Jessica initially seemed thrilled for me, befriending Mark as well. She often teased us about being a perfect couple. Mark and I talked about marriage, and eventually he proposed on my birthday. I was overjoyed. Jessica was among the first to know, and she squealed with excitement, hugging me, offering to help plan. She said, as my best friend, she would do anything to make my wedding perfect. I embraced her, feeling so lucky to have such a supportive best friend. The wedding planning took about 8 months. Mark and I wanted a moderately sized event with close friends and family. Jessica asked to be my maid of honor, and I gladly accepted. My parents were paying a large chunk of the expenses, but Mark's parents contributed a portion as well. Jessica helped me pick the venue, a charming old estate by a lake with tall trees surrounding it. She even stepped in to negotiate with florists, caterers, and a DJ. She was so involved, I began to jokingly call it our wedding, which she happily agreed with, though I thought that was just a playful phrase. Mark teased me that Jessica was more excited than me. Sometimes I worried she was taking on too much, but she insisted she loved planning. My mother said it was wonderful that I had such a dedicated friend. None of us suspected her real intentions. As the date approached, we hammered out details: the color scheme, the menu, the music playlist. Jessica picked her maid of honor dress, and I let her choose something she loved in a similar shade to the bridesmaids. She was so enthusiastic, sometimes overshadowing even me when talking to vendors, but I did not mind. My father was grateful that someone else handled the stress. Mark found it amusing, telling me I should relax. Meanwhile, I was busy with my job, trusting Jessica to manage final confirmations. I told her she was a lifesaver. She just grinned, telling me I'd never forget what she was doing for me. One night, about 3 weeks before the wedding, I recall a small incident that in hindsight was a red flag. I had left a wedding binder in my living room, which contained guest lists, timelines, everything Jessica and I had planned. I walked into the room unexpectedly and found her flipping through it, then quickly hiding a slip of paper in her pocket. I asked her what it was. She said it was just a note about the seating chart. I shrugged, letting it go. Why would I suspect anything else? Now I realize she might have been copying details about guests or finalizing her own hidden plan. I should have pressed her more, but I trusted her implicitly. 2 weeks before the wedding, Jessica arranged a small bachelorette outing for me, Mark's sister, and some close friends. We went to a lounge, had a lovely time, though Jessica kept making cryptic jokes about big surprises at the wedding. I assumed she meant special entertainment or a heartfelt speech. She even hinted that the wedding day would be an unforgettable event for everyone. Mark had his own bachelor outing, which was mild. Jessica boasted that my bachelorette was definitely better than his. I laughed. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Then the final week arrived. I was a bit stressed, but Jessica assured me everything was under control. The estate was booked, the caterers ready, the officiant confirmed. My parents said they had already paid the final deposits. We had a rehearsal scheduled the day before to walk through the ceremony, show the bridesmaids their positions, coordinate with Mark's groomsmen. That morning, Jessica insisted she handle the decorations personally. I thanked her, feeling so lucky. She told me she had a final secret flourish planned. I told her I was dying of curiosity, but she refused to reveal it. My mother told me to let the surprise happen. Everyone believed Jessica was just being an awesome maid of honor. The day of the rehearsal, I arrived at the estate with Mark. We expected to see the wedding planner, the officiant, and some staff. Instead, we found the place bustling with more than just the usual few people. Jessica was there along with her boyfriend, a man named Kyle. He was a quiet type, rarely around. Now he was standing next to Jessica, both beaming. I noticed a large banner near the front, partially covered. Jessica quickly stood in front of it. I asked what was going on. She laughed, telling me it was part of the secret flourish. So not to peek yet. Mark and I shrugged and went to find the officiant. Meanwhile, the wedding planner looked confused but said Jessica had given new instructions, telling staff to set up certain items in the hall. I started feeling uneasy. Mark tried to reassure me. We gathered bridesmaids and groomsmen for a quick run-through. Jessica was chatty, practically glowing with excitement, hugging her boyfriend repeatedly. I teased her that she seemed happier than me, the bride. She just smiled cryptically. I needed to check a detail with the estate manager about the seating arrangement. When I returned to the main hall, I found Jessica unrolling a sign that read, "Congratulations, Jessica, and Kyle on your engagement." My stomach sank. Was this some kind of joke? I stepped closer, seeing that she'd placed it near the front, where my wedding altar was supposed to be. She saw me and quickly tried to shield it. I confronted her, asking what that was. She giggled that it was a surprise, that she planned to announce her engagement to Kyle during my wedding ceremony. I stared in disbelief. She said it would be a double celebration, that I, as her best friend, would love to share the spotlight. My heart pounded. I told her that was insane, that my wedding was not her stage for an engagement announcement. She frowned, telling me not to be selfish, that I'd have my moment, but we could also celebrate her new love. I told her absolutely not to put that banner away. She pouted, claiming I was overreacting. I demanded she remove it immediately. Mark approached, noticing the tension. Jessica turned to him, complaining that I was being unfair. Shockingly, Mark said maybe it could be nice for them to share their engagement news at the reception. He told me to relax, that it might create a memorable day for everyone. I was appalled that my fiancé was taking her side. I asked him if he truly believed it was fine for Jessica to overshadow our wedding. He shrugged, saying it was just an announcement, that it would not overshadow anything. My mind reeled. Why was Mark so nonchalant about this? I told Jessica to give me a moment alone with my fiancé. She left, smirking. I confronted Mark about his stance. He repeated that Jessica was our friend, that she had done so much for the wedding, so maybe we should let her have a small highlight. I told him it was ridiculous, that this was crossing a line. We argued, but he remained calm, telling me not to ruin the vibe, that we should let Jessica do her thing. I felt betrayed, but the rehearsal was about to start, so I tried to bury the conflict temporarily, telling myself maybe I'd reason with them after. We walked through the motions of the ceremony. Meanwhile, the banner about Jessica and Kyle's engagement was still leaning in the corner, partially rolled. I was furious. The bridesmaids whispered among themselves, noticing the tension. The officiant asked if everything was all right. I forced a smile. Then Jessica stepped forward, pulling Kyle with her, telling everyone to gather around for a quick announcement. I froze, expecting her to drop the engagement bomb right in the middle of my rehearsal. She held up her hand, showing a ring. The bridesmaids gasped, some politely applauding. I stood there, feeling the blood drain from my face. Jessica declared that tomorrow, at the wedding, she and Kyle would also formalize their engagement, so it would be a double event. Mark clapped, unbelievably, while I stared in shock. A couple of my friends looked at me with pity, some with confusion. Jessica beamed, hugging Kyle. I demanded that she stop. I said this was my wedding, not a double event. She rolled her eyes, telling me to lighten up. Mark told me to see the bigger picture, how it was just a short announcement. I felt dizzy with anger. The rehearsal ended in total awkwardness. Jessica strolled away happily with Kyle, ignoring my distress. Mark tried to calm me, but I snapped at him, telling him he had no right to let Jessica do this. That evening, I confided in my mother and father. They were appalled, telling me to put my foot down. My father said if Jessica insisted on making an announcement, I should uninvite her. My mother agreed, calling her behavior insane. I told them I was stunned that Mark supported her. My father said maybe Mark was gullible or manipulated. I decided I'd talk to Mark again, demanding he forbid Jessica from turning our wedding into her engagement party. Mark arrived at my place. We argued intensely. He said Jessica had done so much for us, that I was ungrateful. He insisted it would only take a few minutes of the reception for her speech. No harm done. I asked how he could be so naive. He repeated that it was not a big deal, that I'd still be the bride. We fought for hours, culminating in me sobbing that if he cared so little about my feelings, maybe we should postpone. He softened, telling me he loved me, that we'd figure it out. But he never promised to stop Jessica. We parted with the issue unresolved. The morning of the wedding arrived, overshadowed by dread. I got dressed in my white gown, tears threatening to fall, trying to keep composure. My mother gave me a pep talk, telling me I'd shine regardless of Jessica's antics. The ceremony was set for midday at a beautiful garden. I arrived early, noticing Jessica was already there with Kyle, wearing a gown that suspiciously resembled a bride's dress, though not pure white. She greeted me with a broad smile, as if nothing was wrong. I confronted her one last time, telling her I refused to let her announce her engagement. She said it was too late, everything was prepared, and Mark was on board. I demanded to know what she meant by everything. She gave a coy grin, saying I'd see soon enough. My stomach churned. The guests began arriving, taking their seats under the canopy of trees. My father escorted me to the start of the aisle, preparing to walk me down. The music started, but I noticed Mark was nowhere in sight at the front. Instead, Kyle stood there with Jessica, both wearing big smiles. I looked around frantically. The officiant was in place, confusion on her face. My father whispered that maybe Mark was running late. The music played on. Jessica motioned to me to come down the aisle anyway. I froze, unsure what to do. The officiant quietly asked if I was ready. I took a breath, started walking, father by my side, heart pounding. I reached the front, but Mark's spot was empty. Jessica stepped forward, arm in arm with Kyle, telling the guests to quiet down. She said, "Welcome everyone. Today is a celebration of love, but there's been a slight change in plans." My father and I stared in disbelief. Jessica continued, "Instead of a wedding for me, dear friend, we're announcing my own engagement to Kyle right here, right now." She motioned to the side, and a giant banner unfurled, reading, "Congratulations, Jessica and Kyle." The crowd murmured in shock. I trembled, scanning for Mark. My father squeezed my hand. Jessica signaled the DJ to play some upbeat tune. Kyle took a microphone, proclaiming how he and Jessica had decided to move up their engagement announcement, making it official. Some guests clapped hesitantly, confused. I felt tears forming, stammering, "Where is Mark?" Jessica told me not to worry, that Mark would be out soon, but that we should let them have the spotlight first. Furious, I demanded the microphone from her, telling the guests that this was supposed to be my wedding day. Jessica laughed loudly, telling everyone that I'd changed my mind and asked them to celebrate her engagement instead. I stared at her, mouth open in horror. She was lying to everyone that I'd willingly given up my wedding for her moment. The officiant looked at me for confirmation, but Jessica cut her off, saying, "Yes, it's all arranged. We have everything set so Kyle and I can celebrate with you all." My father tried to speak, but Jessica moved the microphone away from him. A few guests walked out, seeing the fiasco. Others gawked. My mother rushed to my side, demanding to know what was happening. Mark emerged from behind a curtain, looking pale, glancing at Jessica, then at me. He stepped to the microphone, stammering that we should remain calm, that there's been a mix-up. I exclaimed that I was the bride, that we were supposed to be the ones getting married. Mark said softly, "Yes, but maybe we can share the day with Jessica and Kyle." My father hissed that this was madness. The guests started muttering. Jessica nodded vigorously, telling Mark to proceed with the plan. He seemed torn, but then announced that he supported Jessica's wish to declare her engagement. I felt my entire world collapse. My fiancé on our wedding day was standing with Jessica, enabling her to hijack the ceremony. My tears finally broke free. I shouted at Mark, "What about us? Our vows?" He hesitated, glancing at Jessica, who gave him a reassuring nod. He turned to me and said, "We can do ours later, after they do their announcement." Shock rippled through me. The fiancé I'd thought was loyal was effectively letting my best friend overshadow my wedding. The officiant, looking bewildered, asked if I wanted to proceed with my ceremony. I opened my mouth, unable to speak, then turned to see Jessica and Kyle smiling smugly. My father clenched his fists, mother shaking her head, tears on her cheeks. That was the moment I realized I'd been left at the altar in spirit. The ceremony was no longer about me and Mark. My fiancé had chosen to highlight Jessica and Kyle first. The betrayal cut so deep I thought I'd faint. With shaking hands, I pulled off my engagement ring, dropped it on the ground in front of Mark, telling him he could let Jessica and Kyle have everything if that was his choice. I turned and marched down the aisle in the opposite direction, father following, mother trailing behind, leaving the fiasco behind me. Some guests rushed after me, offering support. Others remained, uncertain, while Jessica tried to keep attention on her. I heard her voice over the microphone behind me, saying something about how they'd start their own vow exchange. My father guided me to the car, mother hugging me. I sobbed uncontrollably, my heart broken, furious that Jessica's betrayal was so blatant, and that Mark had sided with her for reasons I still did not understand. We drove away from the estate, ignoring the calls or texts that started flooding my phone. My father insisted we go to his house so I could rest. My mother sat me down, comforting me while I wept in my ruined wedding gown. Family friends arrived, outraged at what they'd witnessed. Some told me they'd left the venue as soon as they saw Jessica attempt to claim the stage. No one could believe Mark's compliance. Hours later, I checked my phone briefly, seeing frantic messages from Mark, some from Jessica, others from confused guests. Mark apologized in text, saying he never meant to overshadow me, that he just wanted to keep the peace. Jessica wrote that I was overreacting, that I should be happy for her. I turned the phone off, not wanting to read more. My father stood watch, telling me that I'd do best to stay calm. Mark came to my father's house, knocking at the door, wanting to explain. My father refused to let him in. Mark shouted from outside that Jessica's plan was just a quick announcement, that I'd taken it out of proportion, that he still wanted to marry me. I refused to see him, burying my face in a pillow, tears streaming. My mother told him to leave. He eventually did, apparently cursing under his breath. My mother stroked my hair, telling me I'd escaped a marriage with a man who lacked backbone or loyalty. She told me I'd build a better future without him. It was a sleepless night, my mind replaying Jessica's triumphant grin, Mark standing beside her, the audience's confused faces. I realized the wedding I'd spent months planning was used by my best friend for her own engagement party. In 1 second, I'd lost both my fiancé and my supposed best friend. I remained at father's house, ignoring calls. My father and mother tried to help me salvage any wedding deposits, contacting vendors for refunds or partial refunds. Some were sympathetic. Meanwhile, news spread on social media, with various guests posting about the fiasco. Jessica posted pictures of her and Kyle from the venue, labeling them a day for us. Furious comments poured in from mutual acquaintances, some defending me, some clueless. Mark posted a vague apology, claiming misunderstandings. I was too numb to respond. Over the next weeks, I stayed offline, focusing on healing. My father insisted I see a counselor, which I did. The heartbreak was immense, as I'd fully expected to be a married woman by now. Instead, I'd been humiliated in front of everyone. The counselor told me to process my grief, not to blame myself for others' actions. Mark wrote me a long letter, delivered by mail, saying he truly loved me but felt pressured by Jessica's intense personality. He said she threatened to sabotage everything if he did not allow her announcement, that he had no idea she'd take it that far. I read it, tears in my eyes, but felt no desire to reconcile. I realized he was weak, letting her do as she pleased. Jessica, for her part, posted on social media that I had given her permission to share the ceremony. Everyone who knew me recognized that was a lie. Some old friends cut ties with Jessica, seeing her true nature. I never confronted her directly. I had no interest in hearing her excuses. My father said if she ever came around, he'd chase her off. She did not dare approach me. I found a new job in a different city, wanting a fresh start. My father supported the move, mother too. I left behind the painful memories, though they haunted me at night. A year later, I heard through a mutual friend that Jessica and Kyle never actually married. They broke up soon after the fiasco. Mark, apparently, tried to contact me again to see if I'd give him another chance. I refused. I was done. My new life slowly flourished. I discovered my own resilience, realized that I'd let Jessica overshadow me for far too long, from childhood to adulthood, and that my fiancé's willingness to side with her revealed cracks in our relationship I had not seen. I wrote down the entire story, reflecting on each stage. The childhood bond that led me to trust Jessica completely, the wedding planning that gave her the chance to embed her own agenda, the final day when she publicly announced her engagement, leaving me at the altar with Mark's baffling support. By telling this story in a lengthy narrative, I hope to warn people not to ignore red flags, even from lifelong friends. Sometimes the greatest betrayal comes from those we never suspect. If I had recognized the warning signs sooner, Jessica's constant overshadowing, her cryptic remarks, the improbable involvement of Mark, I might have confronted them earlier, saving myself the humiliating scene on my wedding day. Yet part of me is grateful it happened before signing any legal papers or forging a marriage with someone who lacked the courage to stand by me. Now, as I close this massive account, I acknowledge that the heartbreak shaped me into a stronger person. I discovered that real friendship and real love must be grounded in mutual respect, not overshadowed by one person's manipulative personality or another's weak compliance. Jessica turned my wedding into her engagement party with her boyfriend, aided by my fiancé, and in a single moment, I was left at the altar. That is the story of how I lost both a best friend and a future husband on the same day, but also how I emerged from the wreckage, determined to never again let anyone trample my boundaries or use my life event as their personal spotlight. I share it openly, hoping someone might see echoes of my journey in their own life and choose to defend themselves before it is too late. My name is Rebecca Sims, and this was the day that forced me to discover my own strength. Rising from the altar I never got to walk down, forging a path to a new life on my own terms.